The fantasy of being a wizard and being able to sling all these incredibly powerful spells at your enemies is so compelling that it can actually be really hard to not want to be a wizard when you start to play Dungeons & Dragons. The problem is that when you sit down to actually create your first wizard, it can feel really intimidating and overwhelming. And that's what this video is going to be trying to address. We're going to be breaking down the wizard class step by step, ignoring subclasses for now, to really get a firm foundational understanding about how to actually create and start playing with your wizard. Before we begin, if you do have any questions or comments, please leave them down in the section below. I would love to engage with you guys and let you know what you're thinking about, and love to be able to help anyone out who has any more questions. Also, please do like and subscribe. It does sincerely help the channel. Alright, so without too much further ado, let's just jump straight on into it. Alright, so looking at the wizard class, this table that we have in front of us here comes straight from the player's handbook, and it really gives us a great breakdown of exactly what happens with our wizard as we progress and level up over time. You will be cross-referencing this pretty much every single time you level up to get an understanding of what you're now capable of doing. We're not going to go through each level here, but I just want to give you a good understanding of how exactly this table works so you understand it when you're looking at it in the future. So if we take a look at the top of the table, we're starting out at first level, obviously. It says our proficiency bonus is +2. This is the same for any character who's starting out at first level. Your proficiency bonus will always be +2. If you're not exactly sure what your proficiency bonus is or what it means, take a look at my previous video about the D&D character sheet explained. We go into a pretty good dive there so you get a really firm understanding. If we look over at the next section here, it's labeled features. We can see that our first level wizard gets the ability to cast spells, hence says spellcasting, and you also gain a feature called Arcane Recovery. We will be exploring that very shortly. This next column over here is called Cantrips Known, and we can see that at first level we know 3 cantrips. Cantrips are spells that your character knows so well that they require very minimal energy to actually use, and you can use them essentially an unlimited amount of times. The next 9 columns over here are all listed as spell slots per spell level. So there are 9 spell levels in the game. We can see them all here, 1st through 9. And we can see at first level, you have 2 spell slots available to you, and those spell slots are first level spell slots. If you don't understand the way that spells or spell slots work, I did also create a video all about spellcasting in D&D 5th edition, so please take a look at that as well. The link should be right about here. Alright, so let's take a look at another one here, just as another example. At second level, our proficiency bonus is still +2. We gain something called an Arcane Tradition. This is what subclasses are referred to as for a wizard. Every class is a different name for what they refer to their subclasses as. There are tons of different Arcane Traditions available to you as a wizard, so I would definitely recommend taking the time to go through each one and figure out what fits the flavor of your character best. Next column over, we can see we still know 3 cantrips. However, our spell slots have increased. We now have 3 first level spell slots. Let's take a jump a little bit farther down the list here. If we take a look at 6th level, we can see that our proficiency bonus has increased to +3. This, as I said before, this will continue to increase over time as you level up, maxing out eventually at +6. We can see that we gain an Arcane Tradition feature. So this is a feature that is specific to whichever Arcane Tradition you choose, which is why it's not explicitly listed here, because it will be different for pretty much anyone who's choosing a different subclass. We can see we now know 4 cantrips, and we can now see that we actually have a lot more spells available to us. We not only still have first level spell slots, but now we also have second and third level spell slots. We can cast a lot more spells that are also a lot more powerful. We have 4 first level, 3 second level, and 3 third level spell slots available to us. So it's important to keep cross-referencing this sheet every time you level up to make sure that you have the right amount of spell slots. You don't want to be hampering the power of your wizard, because this is really where they derive it from, their spells and their spell slots. Alright, so if you take a look at this next section here labeled Class Features, this is really where you're going to be looking when you begin your creation of your wizard. So let's take a good look at this first to get a good understanding of it. First up is hit points. If you look at hit dice, it says our hit dice is 1d6 per wizard level. That is the size of the dice that we are going to be using whenever we roll hit points. So whenever we level up, or whenever we complete a short rest, we will be rolling a hit dice to try and regenerate health or to gain more health in total in the case of a level up. There are only 2 classes that use the d6 as their hit dice. It's a wizard and a sorcerer, and it is quite a small one. It does represent the fact that wizards don't tend to be particularly strong. They're more mentally capable than they are physically capable, which is why their hit dice is rather small. If we take a look at the next line, it says hit points at first level. It says 6 plus your constitution modifier. The reason it's 6 is this number here, this 6, will always be whatever the largest amount you could possibly roll on your hit dice is. In the case of a wizard, it's a d6, so you're starting at 6 plus whatever your constitution modifier is. In the case of other classes, say the barbarian, for example, their hit dice is a d12. It's massive, so they will be starting at 12 plus their constitution modifier. Looking at the next line, it says hit points at higher levels. It says 1d6 or 4 plus your constitution modifier per wizard level after first. So the reason it says that, that's how we determine our hit points on a level up. So when this wizard gets to level 2, we're not just going to be doing this 6 plus your constitution modifier anymore. We don't start at the max. We actually will be rolling that d6. So you can roll a d6, say you roll a 3, then you would also add your constitution modifier, whatever that is, to determine what your next hit points are. The reason it has this option for or 4 is that if your DM allows it, you can use something called average dice rolls and just use the 4 plus your constitution modifier instead of actually rolling it out. There can be a lot of situations where wizards in particular can end up getting very, very few hit points if you're just really unlucky with your die rolls to start out. Say you keep rolling 1s or 2s and your constitution modifier is maybe only a +1 or +2, you might be only gaining 2 or 3 hit points per level, and that doesn't really feel really good. So if your DM allows it, they may be able to let you use your the average roll of 4 instead, just so you're gaining at least some level of power per level. Next up are our proficiencies. So these are the things that your wizard's actually going to be particularly good or maybe not so great at doing. If you look first up on the list as armor, it says we are proficient with none. What this means is that as a wizard, we actually can't wear armor. If you're not proficient in the armor, you do not gain any bonus to your armor class for wearing it. You don't understand the logistics of how to actually use it appropriately and wear it correctly to be able to actually gain a benefit from it. So you're not actually able to wear any armor at all as a base level wizard. Next up are the weapons. It says that we're proficient using daggers, darts, slings, quarterstaffs, and light crossbows. What this means is since we're proficient in these items, is that when we are making an attack with them, we are able to add our proficiency bonus to our hit modifier. It allows us to get a little bit of an extra bonus to see whether or not we can actually hit our enemies while using these weapons. Importantly, you will likely not be using these all that often as a wizard. More often than not, you will be using a spell or a cantrip of some kind, but it's important to know that if you had to, you can. Under tools, again, we are not proficient with any tool. There's a wide variety of tools available within the game. Things like artisans' tools, cartographers' tools, jewelers' tools. There's tons of different options available to you, but as a starting out wizard, you are not actually proficient with any tool set. Under saving throws, it says that we're proficient with intelligence and wisdom saving throws. These can be incredibly important in avoiding significant amounts of damage or potentially being mind controlled by some kind of an enemy. So it's really, really important to remember that you have these and to make sure that you're rolling with your proficiency bonus whenever you have to make these types of checks. Next up here we have our skills. So it says we can choose 2 from Arcana, History, Insight, Investigation, Medicine, and Religion. These are super fundamental to actually being able to flesh out and really develop your character and who they are. It's really important to note that you will also be gaining some extra proficiencies from your race and possibly even your background as well. So make sure you don't double up by accident. Say you get proficiency in Insight with your race, make sure you don't also pick that here. The exception being if your DM does allow you to take expertise in a skill because you were offered it twice, but obviously consult with your DM first. And if you have any other questions about how proficiencies and expertise work and saving throws and skills, again, make sure to check out my video about the D&D character sheet explained. We go into a lot more detail about it there. So the next section is called Equipment. It says you start with the following equipment in addition to the equipment granted by your background. So it says we have a choice of either a quarterstaff or a dagger. Mostly that's just going to be flavor, whatever you think works best for you and the character that you're trying to build. So the second option we have is between a component pouch and an arcane focus. Now this one is actually really important and you should definitely discuss this with your DM before you actually make a decision here. The reason it's so important is that because many spells will have something known as a material component. They will require you to have some kind of extra thing such as a pinch of fairy dust or a piece of a mushroom to be able to actually cast the spell. If your DM allows you to be using an arcane focus, you can actually bypass the requirement to use those specific materials unless the requirement of the spell has a material component that is specifically tied to a gold value. In the example of Revivify, it requires 300 gold pieces worth of diamonds. You cannot bypass that using an arcane focus. You actually need to have 300 gold worth of diamonds, which the spell consumes in casting it. If you opt for the component pouch, on the other hand, there is a number of things that you will get as standard with that component pouch, which again, talk with your DM about it, figure out how they want to be able to do it. Personally, for all my games, I allow my players to use an arcane focus because I just find it kind of streamlines the whole experience a lot more. Next up is a choice between a Scholar's Pack and an Explorer's Pack. This again is more or less just kind of flavor. A Scholar's Pack will have things like ink and quills and papers, which can be really important for your wizard as you learn spells, which is something we'll be discussing in a little bit. But you also have the option of an Explorer's Pack, which will have other items like torches and tents and things like that. And finally, and very importantly for your wizard, is you have your actual spell book. This is where you will be recording and what will actually allow you to use your spells that you have. Now getting into the fun stuff, we're looking at spell casting. It's important to remember that as a wizard, all of your spells are contained within your spell book. And it's very important that you keep that book safe and protected, otherwise you might not actually be able to use them. Starting off with cantrips, it says at first level, you know 3 cantrips of your choice from the wizard spell list. You learn additional wizard cantrips of your choice at higher levels, as shown in the cantrips known column in the wizard table. So you can go back up and cross-reference that table to see, as you level up, how many more cantrips you gain. But for our purposes here, we're starting at first level. So again, you get to cross-reference the wizard spell list, which is a very large spell list, and you'll be able to choose any 3 cantrips that you want. So go through them, choose the ones that seem the most important, the most valuable, the most powerful, whatever really speaks to you, go through the list and choose them. Alright, so moving on to the spells and the spell book itself. It says here at first level you have a spell book containing 6 first level spells of your choice. So again, you'll be able to cross-reference the wizard spell list and choose any 6 first level spells that you want. Now these are the spells that you will have written down in your spell book. However, if you remember from the wizard table that we looked at first level you only have 2 first level spell slots. So just because you have 6 spells in your book doesn't necessarily mean you'll be casting them all every single day. You can choose the same one twice, or you could choose 2 different spells, but it's important to note that at first level at least you only have 2 first level spell slots available to you. Alright, so then how do we actually add more spells into our spellbook itself? Well, there's actually a couple of different ways we can do this. As you go about your adventures, you may actually end up finding the spell book of another wizard, maybe one that you killed in battle, or maybe it was an ancient scholar that you found his old reliquary and you were able to actually discover his spell book itself. You can actually use that spell book to add their spells into yours so you can become more knowledgeable and actually learn more spells. Now, it's important to note that there are a couple of caveats here. You can't just copy their spellbook. You can't just necessarily read the spells out of it. It does require some level of commitment and ability. So firstly, you cannot copy down any spells that are for a level that you do not have spell slots available for. So for example, if you're a first level wizard and they have 9th level spells in their spellbook, you can't copy that down. The intricacies and the amount of knowledge that it takes to have those spells are just something that you do not have yet within your wheelhouse. You haven't gained that much experience to be able to do it. You cannot copy those spells and add them into your spell list. For any spell that you actually are able to cast, say you do find some first level spells in there starting out the game, you are able to copy them into your own spellbook, but it does still require some expenditure of resources. It takes at least 2 hours and 50 gold pieces per spell level. And that cost and time reflects the amount of work it takes to practice the gestures and to use in whatever material components might be required in those spells. That's the idea behind the cost requirement. So if a first level spell requires 50 gold and 2 hours of work to copy it into our spellbook, that would mean that a second level spell would take 4 hours and 100 gold pieces worth of effort to be able to copy that spell in. And those numbers will continue to scale up as the spells become more and more advanced. There's another section here that explains about recopying your spellbook. This is important because a lot of wizards will want to keep an actual backup copy of it. Because if something were to happen to your spellbook, if it were to get destroyed in some way, you actually wouldn't have access to those spells anymore. So it can be really critically important to keep a backup copy of your spellbook. So you can still copy this down, and it still does require some time and cost investment, but it is significantly less. It only takes 10 gold and 1 hour per level of spells that you're copying down. So next up is preparing and casting spells. This can be one of the areas that people tend to get really confused sometimes. It can be quite a big bottleneck to really understanding wizard spell casting. So firstly, we're not going to really address spell casting too much here. Like I said before, I do have a separate video entirely on that. So if you have any questions about that, go take a look at that video. You can get all the information you'll need right there. So if we're looking at preparing spells now, this is where it tends to get really complicated. We have a whole bunch of different numbers that have been put in front of us so far. We know that we've been able to add 6 first level spells to our wizard spell book at first level, and we know that we have 2 first level spell slots available to us to actually cast those spells. So how do we know which spells we can actually use? Well, you might not be able to actually potentially even cast all 6 of those spells. As a wizard, on a daily basis, you will need to actually prepare a list of spells that are active to be able to use every single day. The idea here is your spellbook could, at some point in time, become so big and so complicated that you couldn't possibly actually be able to cast all of them offhand. You'll have to spend some time and being able to really finitely decide which spells are going to be the ones that you are going to use for the next day. So how many spells can we actually prepare then? Well, it tells us right here in the text that the amount of spells that you can prepare is equal to your intelligence modifier plus your wizard level. So for an example, if our intelligence modifier is +4 and we're a first level wizard, we can add 4 and 1 together, and that means that we are able to prepare 5 spells. We know at first level wizard we have 6 spells that are in our book, so that means we'll actually have to leave one of them out. So it means even if you really wanted to, you would not be able to cast that 6th spell. You would have to wait until the next day to prepare that one instead, but at that point you'd be leaving another one off the list. This creates a lot of choice for your characters. You really kind of want to be thinking about what potential hurdles and what potential enemies you might be encountering and prepare the spells that might fit best for any given situation. So it's super important to remember that your list of prepared spells will continue to grow as you also increase in power. Since the calculation is your intelligence modifier plus your wizard level, even at just 2nd level, you'll already be able to prepare an additional spell. You definitely need to remember that. You don't want to be preparing fewer spells than you have the ability to prepare. Next up, we're looking at spellcasting ability. So every spellcasting class in the game will use one of either their intelligence, wisdom, or charisma to be able to cast spells. In the case of the wizard uses their intelligence modifier to be able to cast spells. What this means essentially for you is that you just want this number to be as high as possible. It makes your spells as potent as they possibly can be, which just helps them take the most effect. So when we're looking at spellcasting ability, there's 2 things that we really need to pay attention to. And that's your spell save DC and your spell attack modifier. These are the things that you'll be using all the time whenever you're casting spells. So let's take a look at these. So your spell save DC or difficulty class is a number that represents how difficult it would be for an enemy to be able to potentially resist one of your spells. So let's take an example of hurling a fireball into a group of enemies. Well, this group of enemies would all need to make a dexterity saving throw, and they would compare that number against your spell save DC. If they equal or exceed that spell save DC, then they would be taking half damage from it. If they roll lower than your spell save DC, then they'd be taking the full brunt of the effect of the spell. This is why the higher the number for you, the better. So the way that we calculate your spell save DC is 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your intelligence modifier. So again, really important to remember that this will increase as you gain in power. As your proficiency increases naturally as you level up, your spell save DC will get higher. As your intelligence modifier improves through either ability score improvements or by taking certain feats, again, your spell save DC will get higher, making it more difficult for enemies to resist your spells. Next up, we're looking at the spell attack modifier. So this is very similar to really just making any kind of a weapon attack in this game. Certain spells will require you to make a spell attack against the enemy. And again, you just compare that against their armor class. And if you equal or exceed their armor class, you'll be hitting them. If it's below their armor class, you do not hit them with your spell. Calculating this is again very easy. It's simply your proficiency bonus plus your intelligence modifier. Much like our spell save DC, this will also be increasing in power over time as you either gain levels or find new magical objects that might have some influence on these numbers. Next up is ritual casting. This is something that allows you to cast a spell without actually using the spell slot to do so. The caveat here is that it does take a little bit longer. It takes an additional 10 minutes on top of whatever the casting time for the spell is. And the nice little bonus here is that you don't actually need to have the spell prepared. It does have to be in your spell book, but it does not have to be on your list of prepared spells for the day. The spellcasting focus here is what we touched on earlier. It's something that allows you to channel your arcane energy to be able to cast spells without requiring the use of a material component. So the last thing that we need to know about spellcasting here is that as your wizard grows in power, you will naturally be able to add more spells to your book. This represents the amount of work and the energy that they're putting into their studies to be able to grow in power over time. With every level, you will be able to add 2 additional spells to your spell book. Now again, remember, these are not necessarily prepared spells. You will choose that on a daily basis, but these are spells that you can now choose from as they will be added to your book. You can choose any spells from the wizard spell list, provided that you have the slots to cast them. So again, if you're 2nd level, you can't be choosing 9th level spells because you can't actually use those spells. You can't be adding those to your book early. Alright, so now let's take a look at some of the features. At 1st level, we gain access to a feature called Arcane Recovery, and this one can be super clutch in being able to actually regenerate some of our spell slots without actually having to take a long rest. The way that it works is that whenever you complete a short rest, you're able to regenerate a number of spell slots equal to half of your wizard level rounded up. So that can be a little bit weird here, and it does give us an example. It says if you're a 4th level wizard, you can recover up to 2 spell slots worth of spells. You can either recover a 2nd level spell slot or 2 1st level spell slots. So they're taking our 4th level wizard, it's half, so they divide it in 2, so now we can either do 1 2nd level spell slot or 2 1st level spell slots. The fact that it's rounded up is really important because say we are a 5th level wizard, now if we half our wizard level, we're at 2.5, that doesn't really mean anything, so we round up to 3. So now we can either do 1 3rd level spell slot, or we could decide if we want to do 3 1st level spell slots, or 1 2nd and a 1st level spell slot. There's a lot of versatility here, and it's really important to remember that you can do this, otherwise you're going to be really desperate for an ability to cast spells. Next up here, we're looking at Arcane Traditions. As I said, we are not going to be covering this in this video. These are essentially the subclasses that you can choose from. They all represent different schools of magic that might be particularly interesting or compelling to you or your wizard character. So definitely take some time, go through these. You get to choose this at 2nd level, so make sure you know what kind of wizard you want to be building first. Alright, so moving on with the features, we get one at 3rd level called Cantrip Formulas. So this is an optional feature, and the reason it's stated as such is because this is relatively new. It's come out with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which is a relatively new sourcebook published for 5th edition. Prior to that, wizards didn't get any features at 3rd level. They got a couple extra spell slots, and that was pretty much it. So what this feature lets us do, if your DM allows you to take it, is to be able to actually replace one of your cantrips every single day when you complete a long rest. Much like you prepare your spell list, you're able to replace a cantrip with another one, because typically you could not have actually done that. Your list of cantrips are static once they've been decided on. That was it. Next up is the ability score improvement. You will be getting 5 of these as you level up, provided you actually go all the way to max level. You'll be able to get it at 4th, 8th, 12th, 16th, and 19th level. You are able to increase 1 of your ability scores by 2 points, or 2 of your ability scores by 1 each. Again, really important to remember that you are not increasing the modifier, you are increasing the ability score. If you have any more questions about how that works, again, I do have my character sheet explained video, and we can go into a lot more detail about it there. At 18th level, we get an incredibly powerful feature called Spell Mastery. This essentially allows you to turn a 1st and 2nd level spell into a cantrip. You do not need to expend any more spell slots to cast these specific spells. You're able to choose 1 1st level spell and 1 2nd level spell and cast them at will without consuming any spell slots for it. This is really powerful, but obviously you do have to get to the incredibly late game to be able to actually use it. So our last top-end feature here is called Signature Spells. What this means is that at 20th level, you're able to choose 2 3rd level spells, and they do not count to your list of prepared spells. So you essentially get an extra 2 spells prepared at any given time, and you're able to cast them once each at 3rd level without using any spell slots to do so. If you want to cast them at a higher level, you do have to expend the spell slots as normal. Alright, so that's it. Wizard is a really complex but incredibly rewarding and satisfying class to play. I hope that you got something really valuable out of this video and that you enjoyed it. And please feel free to leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought. If you have any other questions or concerns, I'm always happy to discuss and engage with you guys. Please also remember to like and subscribe to my channel. It does really help significantly. But otherwise, take care.